for that family, that's the thing that they're going to walk away with. They're going to walk away with the image of the honor guard and how great they look. They're going to remember the band playing the hymns. They're going to remember the sound of the cadence, drum cadence as they come down the hill. But they will always, always remember the bugler and the notes of taps.
Of all the military bugle calls, none is so easily recognized or more apt to evoke emotion than the call taps. From your United States Air Force Band, this is the Connection Series, a podcast that examines the intersections between the military, music, and storytelling. I'm your host, Master Sgt. Brooke Emery. Today on our show, we talk about the origin of taps with one of America's leading experts on military bugle calls. In our second segment, we examine military honors in a broader way as a member of the United States Air Force Ceremonial Brass demystifies what actually happens during a full honors funeral at Arlington National Cemetery.
We can trace its origin back to the Civil War, the summer of 1862, when Union General Daniel Butterfield decided to use that call as a replacement call for the call of lights out that was used at the time. The call was actually called Extinguish Lights.
That's Jari Villanueva. He spent 23 years with the United States Air Force Band in Washington, D.C., and is considered to be the country's foremost expert on military bugle calls. During his career, he oversaw the arrival and departure ceremonies for the late Presidents Reagan and Ford, and participated as a trumpeter and drum major in over 5,000 ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery. And in 2007, he was inducted into the Buglers Hall of Fame.
And that call, like all the other bugle calls used in the U.S. infantry, were calls derived from French manuals. Now, the original call for lights out or extinguish lights was this call. That's the call that would have been heard in the evening to order lights out. Well, Butterfield decided that the call for extinguished lights was just too formal sounding. So he, along with his brigade bugler, a 23-year-old bugler by the name of Oliver Wilcox Norton, they got together and they revised actually an older bugle call that had fallen out of use prior to the Civil War. They revised the last part of that into the 24 notes that we know today as taps. Lights Out was followed on the parade field by a lone drummer who would strike the drum 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. That was the drum signal for also extinguished lights. Soldiers would call that the drum taps. So when the new bugle call comes into use, they naturally start calling the new bugle call taps. That's where the origin of the word comes from. Of course, there's been many myths associated with the creation of taps, and the most popular one is that of a Union captain who hears the cries of a soldier on the battlefield, and he crawls out to pull the soldier back, and it turns out it's a Confederate soldier, and when he flips the soldier over, he finds out to his horror that it's his son who he thought he had sent off to a music school to avoid the war, but here he is now in front of him dying. Unfortunately, the young man dies, and in the pocket of his uniform are notes that are scribbled out, and supposedly those are the notes of taps, which the Union captain has performed at the young man's funeral. Well, it's a wonderful story, and certainly incorporates the feeling of the Civil War, the horror of the Civil War. But it's just that it's a myth, and it was actually thought of by all people by a guy who did Ripley's Believe It or Not. Robert Ripley, who was a cartoonist, thought of the idea of this story for a television show in the late 1940s. But as his biographer pointed out, even for Ripley, the story was just a little too far-fetched.
It is. It's a little bit too sad to be real.
True, but like any good myth, it incorporated things that were happening at the time, because the myth states that it took place down near Harrison's Landing during the summer of 1862. So there's little bits of truth in it.
Yep. I've heard taps actually started to be used by the Confederate side as well. Is that true?
We're not absolutely sure that they used it, but certainly the Confederates would have heard the call being sounded in Union camps as an evening call, and would have also used it too. The Confederate Army had, bands, they had musicians as part of the army, so it was probably not uncommon that they may have used it by the end of the war.
How did it come to be used at military funerals?
The story is that shortly after the creation of the call, an artillery officer decided to use the call at a funeral for one of his men, figuring that having the 3-volley rifle salute was a little too much, because they were so close to enemy lines, that he supposedly said to the bugler, just sound this new call. Certainly by the end of the Civil War, it becomes associated with military funerals. And then after the war, with all the memorial services that are held, in fact, the first memorial service at Arlington is actually held in 1868. Groups are using the call at military funerals. So by the end of the 19th century, it's used all the time. In fact, it takes a long time for it actually to go into the manuals. Even after the Civil War, it's used at military funerals. It doesn't officially become part of the official protocol until 1891. But like I said, it was used, we know for sure.
I think probably the most famous taps story is that of Keith Clark.
Right. Sergeant Keith Clark of the United States Army Band was the principal bugler at the time that President Kennedy was assassinated. The military district of Washington had no real plans for the death of a president because no one had thought such a young, vibrant president would ever be lost. One of the things that they had overlooked in the planning was a bugler and a firing party. And it actually wasn't into the very early hours of the funeral on Monday, November 25th, that Clark was contacted by his commander that he would be the one performing. They put him in an unfortunate situation, very close to the firing party, almost in front of the firing party, because they wanted to get a perfect shot for television. Because of that, when the time came for him to perform, he had been standing out in the cold for a long period of time. The firing party fired very close to his ears, which must have deafened him. But he was able to sound a very beautiful taps, except for one note that he missed. And of course, that's the bane of every trumpet player and every bugler who goes out to Arlington. You want to play it perfectly, but sometimes a note will get away from you. And that one note was, of course, heard by millions around the world, and it's still talked about to this very day. Keith Clark lived with that. To me, I always think of like Bill Buckner of the Boston Red Sox, letting that ball go through. And of course, when Bill passed away just recently, headlines were, about the missed ball. And of course, when Clark passed away, the New York Times had written, the bugler who missed note at Kennedy funeral passes away. So he was remembered for that for the rest of his life. However, after leaving the Army in 1966, news for your podcast here that not generally known. Keith Clark was a member of the United States Air Force Band.
Was he really?
For a very short period of time, yes. When he enlisted, he was assigned over to the Air Force first for a very short period of time before going over to the Army Band. I had discovered this in some write-ups of Clark, and I found that incredibly fascinating. I was able to interview him several times, and I treasure some of the letters that I received from him, and I've been in touch with his family. And still, that note, like I like to say, is always going to be with us, like the crack in the Liberty Bell. It's part of our American folklore.
It certainly is. The most interesting thing, I reread that account in preparation for this interview, was the fact that he didn't realize that he had chipped the note till he got home. And his daughter said, "Why did you mess up?" And they had all groaned when it happened on television. I completely understood that, because when you're in the moment in a pressure situation like that, what your brain will filter out in order to just get that job done.
Absolutely. I can't say enough about somebody like him, because here he was put into a situation that was the most incredible pressure situation for any musician to ever be part of. It's something that military musicians learn to live with and learn to be able to perform at such a high level under pressure. And to me, it's a wonderful thing. And I'm always proud and always at times envious of guys who could do that. The few times where I was able to sound it as part of a ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier were very special to me. Talk about pressure. I've always called it like the Carnegie Hall for buglers. Another one was sounding taps for General Godfrey McHugh, who was the presidential aide to John F. Kennedy. That was a special ceremony. Of course, every ceremony that I've ever sounded taps at Arlington was important. I belong to an organization called Taps for Veterans, and we're one of the organizations throughout the United States that helps provide live buglers when needed at military funerals. And one of the things I do in my retirement is to go out and sound taps at funerals, and it's something that I'm honored to do, and I think it's a very worthy thing. And for trumpet players out there, if you want to give back after your military career, or even if you haven't had a military career and you'd love to give something back, sounding taps at military funerals is a great way to show your appreciation for our country.
Jari Villanueva, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's my honor.
Arlington National Cemetery is our nation's premier military cemetery. And it's a busy place, with over 150 funerals taking place every single week. And one of the questions members of the United States Air Force Band get asked most often is what exactly happens during those ceremonies. So we asked Senior Master Sgt. Daniel Valadie to take us through a military full honors funeral with escort. Sergeant Valadie has been a member of the United States Air Force Band for 21 years, the last 4 of which he has served as the drum major of the Ceremonial Brass, a unit devoted to carrying out the congressionally mandated mission of supporting these funerals. Here he is, discussing the event in his own words.
Full honors funerals at Arlington National Cemetery. It's probably one of the most significant jobs that we do in the Ceremonial Brass. They're very personal, especially to the family involved. Obviously, it's something that's very personal to them. It's as close as we can get of a direct connection without actually being able to make a direct connection with the family members, because we don't actually talk to them or deal with them. But obviously, it's something that's very intimate to their lives and their experiences with the military. So we do about 400 per year. And the ceremony sort of lays out in 3 acts, almost like a play. And in the first act, the family with the remains and the Arlington National Cemetery rep, they show up at a transfer point, which is just a designated point in the cemetery. And at that point, they will transfer the remains of the deceased from the hearse to the caisson. And symbolically, it's almost like taking the individual or the remains from just its close, intimate family and having it join its military family. So we will stand at attention. The commander of troops will bring the formation to attention when the remains and the family arrive at the transfer point. And then while they're getting out of their cars and waiting, we'll go back and stand at ceremonial at ease. And then we'll come back to attention and we'll play a hymn as they transfer the remains from the hearse to the caisson. The caisson being, for those unfamiliar, it's about 6 horses with another lead horse, and it's a drawn carriage, I guess is one way to put it. It's a flatbed with wooden wheels on it that they'll either have the casket remains, or it's a empty casket where they put the urn if it's a cremated set of remains. But we'll play music supporting that movement of the remains. And in general, most of the time when we're playing is to sort of underscore some significant event within the ceremony. And in particular, any time that the remains are moved is a significant event. So we'll play for that. After the remains have finished being moved, the family will go back to their cars. And then when we're all ready to go and everyone's lined up, we proceed to Act 2 of the ceremony. Act 2 for us is the procession, where the military escort, which is the Flight of Honor Guard troops and the band and the color team, the military escorts its family member, its military member's remains from the transfer point all the way till its final resting place at the gravesite. So that procession acts like a parade. If you would see it, you would think that it looks like a parade with the family's vehicles behind the caisson and with the military escort leading the way for the caisson. Once we get to the gravesite, we're sort of at Act 3, which is all of the various ceremonial things that happen at the gravesite. The first one of which is, again, we perform a hymn to support the movement of the remains to the actual gravesite from the caisson. So again, taking it from the caisson all the way to its final resting place. Once we're there and the family is in their seats by the gravesite, the chaplain will give their committal where they both talk a little bit about Arlington National Cemetery and the significance of that place, as well as the sacrifice of the individual military members. They'll try to comfort the family and try to develop some sort of close relationship with the family as much as they can. So a lot of the really intimate interaction for that ceremony comes from the chaplain and their relationship with the family. Once they're finished with the committal, we'll all come to attention for final honors. So there'll be 3 volleys from the firing party, and then there'll be the performance of taps by a solo bugler. Following that, they'll do the last portion of honors, which is to fold the flag to present to the family. So as they're doing it again, another emotionally significant moment in the ceremony, the band will play the Air Force hymn, Lord Guard and Guide, and that will underscore the flag folding. After the honor guard has finished folding the flag, they'll present it to the chaplain, and the chaplain will present it to the next of kin, to the family. And then the Arlington ladies, which have been a great organization that has supported both the families of those who were deceased at Arlington Cemetery, as well as been really supportive and helpful to the band and the chaplaincy and the honor guard. They'll present a card to the next of kin and sort of welcome them to their ranks. And after that, the ceremony is over. After the card has been presented, the flag has been presented, and we've played final honors, the entire military escort will just head back to our transportation. So that's sort of how the ceremony functions. All of it acts as a proxy for taking this military member and having that member go from their family, join their military family, and be escorted from their military family to their final resting place, being supported at that final resting place as the chaplain can talk about what their sacrifice as individuals means to the country as well as to the family. And having that final military family support them and show them the proper respect and honors for their sacrifice. And so it's a very personal and intimate thing. What the family needs from me, what they need from us as a group, is that strong military presence. They need that support, and they need us to do our job well with the same level of excellence and commitment that their family member showed toward the military. And very proud to have done that for the past 21 years.
This episode was produced by myself, along with Senior Master Sergeant Matthew Irish. Recording and editing help were provided by Senior Master Sergeant Dennis Hoffman, along with Master Sergeants Emily Wellington and Mike Hampf. The executive producer of the United States Air Force Band Connection Series is Colonel Don Schofield.